Well, it's good to be with you guys. A couple years ago, I got to, for the very first time, take a trip to New York City with a friend. And so while we were in New York City, we did the tourist things. We went and saw the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, all those things that you do your first trip, but you don't really do them your second go round. And so we kind of checked those off the bucket list. And then we were walking around and we're in lower Manhattan and we kind of turn a corner and it's pretty quick that we realize that we're in just kind of a different area. Like we've kind of transported a little bit and we find ourselves right in the middle of Chinatown in New York City. And so very different. I mean, it's just kind of coming at you really quick and we're walking and just kind of exploring. And there's a lady with very broken English says something to me and I lean forward to kind of maybe get it one more time. And she shows me the palm of her hand, and inside the palm of her hand, she has a business card sized piece of paper, and in it, or on it, are pictures of handbags and purses. And that what she was, I guess, inviting me to is asking if I wanted a handbag or a purse. Now, I don't carry a handbag, I don't carry a purse, and so some of you may beg to differ. It's a satchel, and so. But I'm kind of curious about this whole thing because I've heard stories about people that have taken little adventures with people that they just meet on the side of the road. So I'm like, sure, why not? And she looks around as though to make sure the cops aren't looking. And then she says, follow me. And we start heading down some alleyways. And I kid you not, twists, turns. I really have no idea where we are. And all of a sudden, we're in an alleyway, and there's a door that's kind of almost hidden. And she opens the door and kind of pushes us into a giant closet with purses and handbags all over the place, from Louis Vuitton to just all different types of designers. And you realize pretty quick that these aren't real. They're counterfeit, okay? And so it's a moment that you feel pretty shady pretty quick. And so we weren't there very long. We kind of tried to barter, and then we're like, oh, I don't think this is going to work. Let's leave. And so we leave and kind of walk out. And that experience was pretty impactful. And here's the truth. If you've ever seen counterfeit products, it can be pretty funny. There were some pretty funny products that we even saw. And so I did a quick Google search to look up counterfeit products and found a few that I thought would be kind of cool for you guys to check out. And so many of you, you've been prompted to maybe buy some Adidas, okay, instead of some Adidas. I think we have some pictures here. Yeah, there they are. Or maybe that's not your flavor, but you're all about the designers. And so this is one of my favorites. This is Dolce & Banana. Close, but not quite. Or maybe you're looking for some Air Hikeys. I'm not sure exactly what happened with that check there. Or maybe you're not really Hikeys, you like Air Likeys. They're not even trying here. I'm not sure what's going on. Didn't even put much effort. Maybe electronics are your thing. I love this. This is a Nintendo Polystation. Which, if you look underneath, it says it's a digital stereo. So it's neither Nintendo nor Sony Polystation. It's some type of stereo system. And then, or maybe it's not a Game Boy, but they do have maybe a Game Child for you. Points for creativity. Or maybe it's action figures, and you're looking. It's not a bird. It's a plane. It's Special Man. Or I love this. It's a new style Ninja tortoise. Or listen, counterfeit products make it all the way even to household goods. I almost missed one. For those Laker fans, Kobe would be so proud if you rocked a jersey like this. Or instead of Sharpies, you can rock some Skirpies, which just sounds horrible. And I realize we live in Washington State, and so it's kind of hit or miss on whether or not you like Starbucks and you support it. So maybe if you don't like Starbucks, then you could support this counterfeit of Sunbucks. This is found in East Asia. Or this is probably the grossest. You think, man, there's counterfeit in everything, but you didn't think that it would find its way all the way even to toothpaste. And we've got crust. I guess if you're balling on a budget, crust will do it. And so now we can laugh and we can kind of joke, and it really is kind of funny. But the truth is that I guess the more you dig in, you start to realize that counterfeit and counterfeit goods and products is actually a real problem. That in our world, that they estimate this past year that between the consumer and businesses, that about $300 to $600 billion was lost last year in counterfeit goods. And it's still, maybe that doesn't hit home, but when you start to realize that right now the largest growing counterfeit industry is that of pharmaceuticals, drugs, that people are making counterfeit drugs and selling them to actually places like Walmart and Walgreens, so that these drugs are actually making their way into your home. And it's one thing if it's just a sugar pill and doesn't really help alleviate the issue. It's another thing when it actually makes things worse and may even reports of death. Or this week, I read an article in 2012 that 84,000 counterfeit electronic parts made their way into the U.S. military. That there were chips that went into fighter planes that helped them avoid collision. And luckily, that those chips were caught before they went into the aircrafts, because if they hadn't, then there would have been hundreds, if not thousands, of men and women in the armed services that would have lost their lives. And so when you start to look at it there and at that level, you start to see that counterfeit products start moving from being funny to being unbelievably dangerous and deadly. And tonight, that's my hope. For us to look at this one final story that we're going to look at in Exodus and see that when the people of God choose to trade something real for something counterfeit, it's no laughing matter, that it actually becomes deadly and dangerous. And so we've been kind of tracking these last 4 weeks, and this is kind of to catch you up to speed in case maybe this is your first time here. In the story of Exodus, we see that God's chosen people, the people that he loves, the people that he's chosen for himself, they've been in bondage and slavery for 430 years underneath the tyranny of the most powerful man on planet Earth, Pharaoh in Egypt. And so they've been there, and God hears their cry. He hears them, asking for deliverance, that they're not okay with where they are. And so God raises up a leader named Moses and sends Moses to the Pharaoh and says, hey, tell him to let my people go so they can go into the land that I've promised them so they can worship me, know me. I want to reestablish this relationship with them, to make a covenant, to make vows with them. Finally, after a lot of persuasion and several plagues, Pharaoh finally says, okay, you can go, you can leave. And so they leave the land of Egypt and they make their way all the way to the Red Sea. They get to the Red Sea and they're blocked. Pharaoh at this point decides he wants to change his mind on all of this. He goes, hey, no, listen, I'm losing a massive asset. And so him and all of his army head to collect the Israelites and bring them back. And so the Israelites at this point are going, are you kidding, God? You got us out of Egypt, brought us all the way to this point just so that we could die? And God flexes his muscles and the Red Sea parts and the Israelites walk across, millions of Israelites walk across on dry land, get to the other side, Pharaoh and his entire army, and in the Red Sea crossing, and the waters come down and crush all of them. Finally, on the other side of the Red Sea, they are free from slavery, free from the tyranny of Pharaoh. He's no longer, he can't come after them anymore. And they're free to go to the land promised to the Israelites. And we see God, show up to the people, He leads them with a cloud by day, fire by night. Every morning that the Israelites wake up, manna, bread from heaven is on the ground for them to collect it. Every single day, God does this for his people. He provides for them. There's a point where they're thirsty, and God, they hit a rock, and fresh water, spring water, pours out of this, enough to quench the thirst of millions of people. There's an army that attacks the Israelites, and listen, they were slaves, they're not soldiers, but God provides a way for them and protects his people. And then it gets to this point where God wants to make his presence known, and they surround Mount Sinai. And God says, listen, this is the whole point. I want to know my people. I want to be among them. And so he kind of descends on the mountain, the cloud, with thunder and lightning and the sound of a trumpet. And God's people are terrified, overwhelmed by God's presence. They go, Moses, you go talk to God. God speaks to his people, and he starts to make these vows to his people, much like marriage vows, that you will be my people, and I will be your God. That I will love you, and you'll love me back. And I'll bless you, and you'll bless me. And it's this covenantal language, these promises that God makes to his people. And God's people look and say, man, yes, we're in. We want to. All that you've said, we will obey that. That you are the Lord, our God, who's delivered us out of Egypt. And they make these promises. So Moses heads up to the mountain so they can work out the details of what this covenant relationship's going to look like. To process the 10 Commandments and the law of like, hey, this is what it looks like to be in a relationship with the God of the universe. Here's what it looks like to be God's chosen people. And that's where we find ourselves in the story. So if you have your scripture, Exodus chapter 32, we'll have it up on the screen, but I want to read this. I'd love for you to read along. Exodus chapter 32, starting in verse 1. This is what it says. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain. He'd been up on the mountain about 40 days, about a month and a half. And they're starting to grow restless, overwhelmed, feel abandoned. Like, I guess he's pieced out. I don't know where we go from here. So they start to get a little fearful. And so they gathered around Aaron and they said this, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, the contempt is palatable. You can see it in the scripture. Like this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. In verse 2, Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me. This gold, where did they get it as slaves? The Egyptians, God had given the Israelites favor on their life, so much so that the Egyptians gave them gold as a parting gift. It was going to be used to build a tabernacle so that God's presence would dwell among his people. But they give it to Aaron. This is what he does with it, verse 3. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and he made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, a bull, a young bull, fashioning it with a tool. And then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. The exact same words that they had just told in the God of the Bible. They had told Yahweh in this covenant relationship. They say, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. After they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry, which is sexual immorality. Many scholars would even believe it's the same word for orgies, that this was a part of their worship, what they had seen the Egyptians do. So here's what I want to do tonight. In the context of this passage and the next few verses that we'll read in just a little bit, I want to answer 3 questions tonight. And the first question is this: what's the draw to idols? What's the allure? Because if we're honest with one another, we look at this and we go, Drew, I don't really get that. I've never personally wanted to worship an idol. You've never probably had one of those nights where you look at your neighbor like, dude, last night got crazy. All of a sudden, we were worshiping a little bull. Like, that just isn't a part of our vernacular. Like, it's not a part of our story. So we've got to answer the question, what is the draw for the idols? The second question I want to answer is this, is we're going to see in just a little bit in the scripture how God responds to the people's idolatry. And we're going to see God decide, man, I'm done with these people. I'm going to wipe them out, start over. And this, if we're honest, this is the part of the Bible that we get a little embarrassed by God. We go, okay, God, you just kind of flew off the handle. You're getting bent all out of shape. You just need to chill out and relax. You're embarrassing us. And so this is the whole reason, Drew, I didn't want to bring my friend to church tonight because we were going to talk about this, and now it's awkward, and I've got to answer a lot of questions. This is the part of the Bible that we want to just skim over and get to the kind of the easier parts, the parts that are easier to digest. So we have to kind of figure out, what do we do with that? And then the last thing is I want to answer is, what does all of this have to do with us? Thousands of years later, what does any of this have to do with me, with you, with us? And so that's kind of the map for tonight. So the first question, what's the draw to idols? Why are they seductive for the people of Israel? And there's 2 points to this. And here's the first one. The reason the people of Israel are drawn to idols is it gives them a sense of control. All idols give us a sense of control. It's a connection with something bigger than me, something that's spiritual, but something that I can control. So I can box it up. I can make this about how I want to do this. And I can control the situation. So maybe God's not going to answer my prayers in the appropriate timing or the appropriate way, but at least in idol, I can control this. I can make it do what I want to. All pagan worship of idols was it was under this kind of concept. It was this: I'm going to worship you, I will sacrifice to you, and then you're going to give me what I want. It's a transaction. And so I will sacrifice to you, and then you will bless my crops, you will bless my livestock, or maybe in our day and age, this would be money, you will give me power. And so we worship, and it gives us this sense of control. Ultimately, all of it is a response out of fear and scared. God, because here's the deal, the God of the Bible, you can't control. You can't box him up or put him in your pocket. You don't get to manipulate him like rubbing the lamp of a genie. He's unpredictable. He's uncontrollable. And so the people of Israel are drawn to something that at least they can wrap their minds around. And the second part, the second reason, is that idols give you permission to do what you want. The language that they use here in chapter 32 is, let's make an idol that will ultimately lead us, that will lead us to the promised land, lead us out of Egypt. What's interesting is this, is with a fashioned idol, man-made idol, it can't lead anywhere. It has to be pulled everywhere, which is ultimately what we want. I'll decide where we go. I'll control that. I'll do what I want, and the idol just follows along with you, blessing that. And so it gives us permission to do whatever we want. And in this, the people of Israel, or even us today, we never ask the questions, is this true? Is this good? Is this what's best? No, when it comes to idols, we only ask this question, what's good for me? What's good for me? And ultimately, with idols, we only care about ourselves. We want to craft a spirituality that fits my needs and lets me do whatever I want. And here's the deal. When we start to put it in this different language, the Israelites that get a bad rap, you start to see, okay, I see how they could head down that path. I see how they could do this. For us, we don't build little statues. That's not in right now. That's not super trendy, okay? And so instead, the way this plays out for you and I is we want to define God. We want to decide what he looks like. We want to decide. We want to be able to kind of control him. We want him to be able to kind of make it okay for us to do whatever we want to. And so we see this in statements like this, and we see this all over our city. It says that people say stuff like this, even within the church. I feel like God is like blank. Or maybe we wouldn't say that. We would say something like, God would never blank. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is say, listen, the God that I serve, I don't think he would do that. So therefore, I define who he is, and I don't like that part, so I'm going to erase that. That I'm going to control God. I'm going to build him in my own little image, the way I would do it. That's how I'll build him. Because I can control this. and this lets me do what I want. And we're drawn to that. We're so drawn to that. Our culture that we live in wants spirituality, but it wants it on their terms. And we do this. We do this as the church. R.C. Sproul, an author and theologian, says it this way. I thought it was beautiful. I have the quote up here. He said, "The cow gave no law and demanded no obedience. It had no wrath or justice or holiness to be feared. It was deaf, dumb, and impotent, but at least it could not intrude on their fun and call them to judgment. This was a religion designed by men, practiced by men, and ultimately useless for men." But let's be honest tonight. Isn't this what we want? A God who is okay with our lifestyle. A God who's not going to intrude on our fun. A God who will allow us to indulge in our fleshly pleasures. But a God that we can still worship when we want to. That we can still come to church. We can still practice our religion. Isn't this the God we want? That really is the core issue. The fact that we've created a God out of love and compassion who has no holiness or wrath or justice to be feared. Haven't we created a God who would not think of disciplining us or punishing us or the people around us for our sin? We have created a God in our own image. And if we take our theology, how we see God, and we bend it to meet our lust, our pleasures, our desires, that's idolatry. It's idolatry. We've created an idol that we both control and gives us permission to live however we desire. Here's what's interesting. At least the Israelites were honest. At least the Israelites had the audacity to put it out in the open. Our idols are often hidden. They're masked. And we can justify them very easily in our lives, which I think make them even more dangerous. So how do we know that we have idols? How do we identify them if they really are that secret, they're that hidden? I've got just a few quick questions to kind of assess. I'm going to run through these really, really fast. But I'd encourage you, because I really do believe that as a church, we've all got idols that we wrestle with. And so I'd hope that you wouldn't be so dismissive and just go, no, that's not me, Drew. I don't really struggle with that. No, I think we all have idols that have a tendency to kind of step up, and we have a tendency to want to worship. The question is, what are they? And so I'm just going to kind of run through these questions. And the first one is this: what do you treasure the most, or what are you passionate about? Being passionate about things is not a bad thing. But if you really think about what's your motivation, what gets you up in the morning, what gives you purpose, why do you pray, what are you praying for, why do you care, why do you strive? What is the one person or the one thing that if taken from you, it would ruin everything? There may be an idol there. Timothy Keller, another author, says this: what is an idol? It's anything more important to you than God. Anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God. Anything you seek to give you what only God can give. Counterfeit gods, if you fail them, will never forgive you. And if you get them, will never satisfy you. Only God will. Jesus in his resurrection. So what do you treasure above everything else? Number two, what are you the most afraid of? Like, what are your fears? Is it I don't want to get sick? Or I don't want to be alone. I don't want my spouse to die. I don't want to be at the funeral of my child. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose my last friend. Or what is it that you're most afraid of? What is it that scares you? What if this happened, life would fall apart? There may be an idol there. Timothy Keller once again said, a counterfeit god or an idol is anything so central and essential to your life that should you lose it, your life would feel hardly worth living. Number three, where do you run from control, or run for comforts, rather? Where do you run for comfort? Things go bad, you're stressed. Do you run to alcohol? Do you run to food? Do you run to pornography? What vice do you run to? Do Do you just go to bed and pull over the covers over your head, just hope that it all goes away? What is it that you run to for comfort? Or maybe it's this, what causes you to be angry at God? What causes you to be angry? That you would say something like, man, God, how dare you let me lose my job? Or how dare you take this relationship from me? How dare you let me not have children? Don't take my social status. How dare you let those people say those things about me? What we are saying is this: God, how dare you take my idol? That was central to my existence, and you took that from me. How dare you? What causes you to be angry at God? Timothy Keller says, when anything in life is absolute requirement for your happiness and self-worth, it's essentially an idol, something you're actually worshiping. When such a thing is threatened, your anger is absolute. Your anger is actually the way the idol keeps you in its services, in its chains. And lastly, what do you make the biggest sacrifices for? Is it time, energy, money, effort, long hours, lots of money, devotion? What's on your mind when you can't sleep? What are you thinking about? An idol has such a controlling position in your heart that you can spend most of your passion and energy, your emotional and financial resources on it without a second thought. The true God of your heart is what your thoughts effortlessly go to when there is nothing else demanding your attention. What do you enjoy daydreaming about? What occupies your mind when you have nothing else to think about? These may be spots. I'm not guaranteeing it, but there may be spots there. I think at some level we're all willing to pay our idols. We're all willing to worship our idols. And whatever it costs, we gladly would give it. For example, I know that there are men in this room that no cost is too big for sexual gratification. That you would risk your job, your reputation, your character, your marriage for sexual gratification. You bow down to that idol. And don't count the cost, because it's got that much of your heart. There's some of you that are going in debt right now, not just because you're a college student, but because you bow down to the idol of having to have the nicest stuff or the latest gadget. And you watch your credit card bill go up because that's how you worship this idol. Or maybe it's the amount of time you spend getting ready in the morning. Or that's how you worship the idol of body image. Statistics would say, and listen, this is not far from men, I believe, either, but it says that this is just in the U.S., women spend an average of 55 minutes every day primping in the morning. 55 minutes. But yet we have no time to spend with the Lord. We have no time for a relationship with the God of the universe because our worship goes somewhere else. That's just average. I found this statistic, and this is the most conservative one that I could find this week. So I'm giving you kind of the low end. For people our demographic, our age, says that we spend an average here in America of 90 minutes a day on our phone. An hour and a half a day on our phone. That's the conservative average. Many people say that it's probably closer to about 162 minutes. That's almost 3 hours a day that you spend on your phone, worshiping that idol of connection, technology, social status, whatever it may be. We easily worship and we think nothing of giving 3 hours to it. I want you to hear this. Slavery is submitting to and serving a master for a desired outcome. And I want you to know that idolatry always leads to slavery. Idolatry always leads to slavery. The master that you serve, you are a slave to that master. For me personally, if I'm honest with you, the idols that I serve in my life are that of approval and of control. I want everything boxed up. I want it to be the way that I envision it to be, the way I want it to be, from every relationship to every situation. And I will bow down to any idol that will make sure that I have control of a situation, that there are no surprises for me, and it's exactly the way I want it to be. That's where I'm drawn to that, so much so. And I'm also really drawn to the idol of approval. For me, it's really easy to throw my money or my gold in this story into the fire of, let's say, Amazon or whatever it may be. And then as I bow down to that, man, it out pops, man, a new shirt or a new pair of shoes that I bow down to, hoping that somehow it will make you like me more. That even in these moments of stepping up here on stage preaching to you, so much of my heart wants you to approve of me, wants you to like me, wants you to walk away entertained, want you to walk away and go, man, that was incredible, I love it. And here's the deal, so much of my heart would bow down to that and would say what would please you instead of saying what would please God. To speak truth. It's the pulls in my life. And it's this daily wrestle. And listen, I'm nowhere near walking in freedom of that. But this week, man, God has highlighted those in my life and made them very real to me. This is what I'm walking. We all have idols. What are yours? So when you look at it, man, the Israelites don't seem that crazy. But I want you to look at this. The second part of God's response. And we need to answer, man, why does God get so bent out of shape? In verse 7, it says this is God's response. I want you to look at this. Verse 7, then the Lord said to Moses, go down because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them. Then I will make you, Moses, into a great nation. Whoa. It's a little intense, right? Like I said, this is the part that we get a little embarrassed by. We're a little like, whoa, God, too much, too far, chill out. They didn't mean it. But I want us to see the context here. What was the context? The whole point of the Exodus was this, that God saw a people that he wanted to make his bride, that he wanted to love them, he wanted to walk with them. He said, listen, you're unique, you're different. No other people are like this. No other people are promised my presence. And so he brings them out into the desert, man, to make marriage covenant vows to them. I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people. I'm going to love you. You're going to love me. I'm going to bless you. You're going to bless me. Let me paint it this way. It would be as though you in this room started a dating relationship. And so married people just kind of go back in time with me. Started a dating relationship. And the guy looks at you months into this relationship and says, listen, I've never been around anyone like you. Like, I love you and I want to marry you. And you're like, oh, I feel the same way. And then there's like this exchange of like, it gives you a ring. And he's like, okay, this is a proposal. So now in this engagement season, you rush off to start planning a wedding, to get a dress, find a gazebo, or whatever it is that is in your fantasy of a marriage. And so you start piecing all of these things together. And on the way to the marriage, you decide, well, let's rent an apartment. We're going to grab this apartment and we'll start prepping it for our marriage. And so you rent this apartment, you start buying furniture, placing it in this apartment. You buy a bed, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's gonna be our bed one day. It's crazy. And maybe you start even buying candles, filling the apartment with candles, so that when you get married and you come back from your honeymoon, that you can light those candles. And maybe even make a mix CD, and you're just real pumped, and it's got all the best slow jams on it, and you're just like excited. This future, this promise that's to come. And you're out of town for a reason, and you come back, and you're just going to check on the apartment. And you walk in, and you notice that the mix CDs being played. You see the candles all lit. And you walk into the bedroom and you see that he's in the bed with another woman. It's not you. And in that moment, as your heart breaks and you feel the gravity of the situation, I can't. It's one thing for you to cheat on me. It's another thing for you to do it here. This is inhumane. And the brokenheartedness of God. Many people look at when Moses walks down to meet this people, and he sees the people, and his heart is so enraged that he throws the 10 Commandments down and they shatter. And you're like, what was all that about? The 10 Commandments represented the covenant. It was a covenant, the promise between God and his people. It would be the equivalent of, in that moment, grabbing the future marriage certificate and tearing it in half. And going, I guess we don't need this. Or maybe for us, it would be like maybe pulling off the engagement ring. And God walking out the door. You start to feel the weight of all the promises that God had made to his people, the vows that he made to his people, and then they cheat on him, using all the things that he had given them to bless him to worship with idolatry and adultery. And this is the story. This is yes, God's heart is so broken over our idolatry. But the covenant had been broken. And that's why he responds this way. Because our sin breaks the heart of God, because it's not just sin. All sin is idolatry. All of it. It's choosing a different God to worship instead of our God. It's choosing to cheat on God. And to go, God, I don't think you're going to satisfy. I don't think you're going to complete. You're not enough. I need this. So I'll worship this. Church, I want us to be a people that are quick to confess. That are quick to say, man, God, take this. I don't want this. I don't want to be this. And may we feel the weight that we have idols and they break the heart of God. After this whole story takes place, Moses looks at the people of Israel and he says, maybe I can fix some of this. Maybe it's possible that I can make an atonement, which is atonement just means you can fix it, you can make it right. So I'm going to try that. So the next day, he goes up to the mountain to meet with God, and he looks at God and goes, God, can I make an atonement for these people? Don't destroy them. Don't start over. God, if you can, just blot my life out. Take my life out. If you'll take my life, this is what he says in Exodus at the end of the chapter, take my life to save these people. And God looks at Moses and says, you can't make an atonement for them. You can't. And Moses says, but would you let the grace that you've given me, the favor that you've given me, the promise, would you let it move from me and land on them too? And God says, yeah, I'll do that. The grace that I put on your life, Moses, the favor that I put on your life, I will let it leak into the people of Israel. And God forgives the Israelites, and the rest of the Exodus is God restoring that covenant that covenant relationship, giving new vows to his people, making new promises. And yes, and they'll trip up, they'll slip up, they'll make mistakes, and he picks back up and he makes a new promise, and he continues this relationship because the God of the Bible is a gracious God, a loving God. who looks and says, I have every right to rip up this marriage agreement. I have every right to throw the ring back in your face, but I'll restore it. But Moses wasn't sufficient enough. I mean, the sacrificial system hadn't even come yet. At the end of Deuteronomy, Moses says this. He says that one day there will come a greater me, one much better than me, and he'll make atonement for the people. And you turn the pages from the end of the Old Testament into the New Testament, and you see that that person that's going to stand in the middle between God and his people is God himself. That God leaves his throne room, wraps himself in human flesh, and moves into our neighborhood. And he stands on that cross or hangs on that cross between God and man, and he says this, God, you blot my life out. You take my life in order to save these people. All the grace, all the favor that's been placed on Jesus, would it pass through him and land on us, his bride? In Jesus' blood, God did not deny. It was completely sufficient. And his blood covers us and allows men to wipe away, to atone for the sin, to atone for our idolatry, so that the relationship can be restored between us and God. That's the story of the gospel. It's the story of every believer. That Jesus died for us to rescue us, to redeem us, so that our relationship with God could be restored, so that those marriage vows would be made ring true again.